Hey guys, so in this video I wanted to discuss training volume, since this is a rather hot topic in the industry today, and it's a great question. It's a very fundamental thing that you need to understand about how much training volume should you do. And the reason why is because training volume basically determines how much of a stimulus is actually generated. And this is important because we want to be able to generate enough stimulus to create an adaptation for strength, hypertrophy, muscle retention if you're dieting, whatever, in order to have the desired training effect. If you don't have enough of a training stimulus, you will not simply see those adaptations at all. However, if you have too much of a training stimulus, you're not going to be able to actually recover and adapt. This goes back to the whole principle of SRA, right? So when we first train, we incur a training stimulus. And then when we recover and we adapt to that stimulus, that's when we're actually making the gains. So you think about being in the gym and actually performing the work as the whole trigger for those gains to actually take place. You want to be able to incur enough stimulus so then you can actually disrupt your body's homeostasis or your body's physiology from being in a normal state of where it currently is, so then you can keep progressing. However, you don't want to do too much that you limit your progression. You're not able to actually recover and adapt before the next training session consistently. Just as a rough guideline, this is what I would recommend for most individuals. So beginners, 8 to 12 sets. Intermediates would be 13 to 16, and then advanced probably 16 through 20. Now, if you're a beginner, typically I don't like to define beginners in terms of training age. I like to define it in terms of how fast they can progress, because sometimes people who have been training suboptimally, maybe haven't made that many gains in their first year, because they've been following a poor training program. Basically, it would be somebody who's able to increase loads and see progress on their gym lifts from week to week. Intermediates would be every other week, basically 2 to 3 weeks. Every 2 to 3 weeks, you can kind of see progress. Even up to 1 month, late stage intermediate. Then advanced is going to take at least 1 month, if not more, to actually be able to see quantifiable changes in performance metrics in the gym. So looking back at this whole chart right here, this is going to basically be defined as your effective volume or quality volume. And what do I mean by quality volume? What I mean by that is that these sets should be taken to a decent proximity to failure. So in terms of RPE, or reps in reserve, which I think is a little bit more of a useful metric for this, for the sake of this. Basically, let's define this as being 3 reps in reserve to 0 reps in reserve. Somewhere within that range, so RPE 7 to 10, with high quality of effort and technique being in place. I typically have my clients earn their volume. So if I have a client that comes to me, and if they have said, hey, look, I've been doing this much volume, and here are my lifts, this is what I look like. Typically I'll be able to look at their physique and their strength and their volume and determine if something's up, and if we probably need to change some things. So typically, for example, if I have somebody who's doing a lot of volume, like upwards of 20 sets, but they're not very big, they're not very strong, and then usually what happens is that they send me their form videos, and it's just bad technique, bad body, just tons of body English, not a very high level of effort, or a poor mind-muscle connection. So I think it's important to state that this has to be quality volume. So you should probably have your technique in a good spot. So what that means is take your muscle through a full range of motion. Make sure that you are having proper technique. So on squat, make sure that you are not having your knees cave. You're able to basically put as much force through the quads as we want in the case of hypertrophy, or squatting with proper technique. It's just overall, this isn't really the video to talk about technique. Basically, you have to have a high level of effort and prove to me that you have all these fundamentals in place, because they've done plenty of studies where they've had people do upwards of like 45 sets per week. And what they found is that you can make gains on 10 or like 45 sets per week in both of those. Now the difference was that the 45 set per week group was like not very good, effort, probably poor technique. And then the 10 sets per week group, they had, were taken to failure with, better overall technique, better statistical analysis, and typically better people conducting the studies. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that basically you can use volume as a crutch for a lack of attention to detail. Now, I don't like doing that because I found that there are other issues that come from that. You basically will tend to have more overuse injuries because you're going to be taxing other secondary structures besides the muscles to a larger extent. You're typically going to be spending more time in the gym than you need to, and that's not practical. And I mean, like, I like being in the gym, but I also like want to have a life outside of the gym. Like, I like to eat food, I like to talk to my friends, I like to do other things, and I want to actually make the most out of every single set. So my recommendation for most people is make sure that your technique is first and foremost in place, and then earn that volume. So if you're a beginner and you have been doing, higher sets, but you're really not seeing like very great results, or like something just isn't lining up, I would take a time to look back at your technique. Make sure that you're doing things properly. Are you applying proper, level of effort? Are you actually trying hard? Lots of times people just layer on volume, and I've been there. I've done this, where I've had 15 sets of back to do in one session, and because I know I have to do so much, typically my work quality declines. So make sure that you are actually training properly, and that you are actually have your fundamentals in place before just adding on extra volume, because more is not always better. And I think that you need to have the fundamentals in place before just laying on a ton of volume. I want my clients to, for example, to basically be able to prove to me that before I add more volume, that they can do at least 12 sets of high quality work on their muscles and send me form videos before I just arbitrarily assign volume because we're not getting the response. Because I need to make sure that things are in place, that they're actually doing things right. Are they having a high level of relative effort? Is their technique in place? And then once that's done, and if I'm not seeing them progress at the rate that I think that they should, then I will actually add on volume. But again, don't use it as a crutch. Understand volume is just determining the degree of stimulus. And for myself, I want to make sure that the quality of stimulus is high, so I'm getting the most out of every single set. So I'm not just wasting my energy in the gym. Because again, another downside to doing more volume than you actually have to is that you're going to just have more fatigue. It's going to be more difficult to actually recover from your training overall. So don't just add on a ton of volume. Now, the second half of this video, I wanted you to discuss, should you do a cyclical volume or do a static set volume? And I don't think that there's any one correct way. And let me just show you what I mean using a few examples. Okay, so right here, I have an example of a cyclical approach of what I would do for, let's say I have a beginner lifter who responds well to 10 sets per week. So basically what I'll do is I will keep the average set, per mesocycle I know that they respond best to, or I expect to see the desired response from the stimulus magnitude of the volume around 10 sets per week. So on week 1, it'll be 9 sets, week 2, 10, week 3, 10 sets again, and then week 4, 11 sets. And then kind of just repeat that process. Probably have a deload week where I go down to like, 7 sets or whatever, but that's besides the point. The overall set volume average is 10 sets. Now, in contrast, if I was to do a more of a static set approach, where I was just keeping at 10 sets per week, again, because that's the average, static set progression I expect them to say, they respond better to. then I will just do the 10 sets, but it's still like the same overall stimulus magnitude. Now, there are some benefits and some downsides to this approach. That with the cyclical volume, I found that this works better for people who like to be a little more progressive with their training approach. They like being able to add a little bit more work per week. They just enjoy this style of training. And it just is more fun for them. You know, they can do a little bit more work. You know, the gym session might be a little bit shorter. But it's not like a magical approach. So in terms of how you assign your training volume, everything should be around an average mesocycle progression. One benefit of this too is that typically if you're coming off of a deload week, this 9 sets is going to, you know, help you become more reacclimated to the training volume. You might have a little bit less soreness, which is a good thing for you know, reducing you know, potential limits in performance for following weeks. And then you kind of like a slightly functional overreaching effect potentially before you deload, and be a little more psychologically okay with taking a deload because you did push a little bit more in that week 4 before you deloaded. But again, there's not one magical training approach to volume. There's multiple ways to dose it, and a lot of it just has to do with what can you adhere best to. What do you enjoy training like? You know, if I have somebody who likes pushing a little bit more, like every single week, I will not do a cyclical volume approach, and I'll usually keep them around one static set and just let them, you know, do more higher effort sets, because they're going to be able to recover from that more predictably and better from a static set volume, because their absolute like effort is going to be higher. Like that's what guys like Dorian Yates did. You know, where they kept their set volume lower in around 14 sets per week, but they trained mostly like RPE 9 to 10 on every single one of their sets. Yeah, other people like Jay Cutler, who did more of a cyclical volume approach, who was a little more conservative with his RPEs, and he pushed, you know, in some weeks before he had like a break. So I guess my whole point here is, does it really matter? No. Like, I don't really think that it's going to make that much of a difference in the actual outcome. I think that it comes down to what can you sustain, what do you enjoy training like, and just make adjustments accordingly. Because, again, there's been a lot of clash in the industry about, should you do a cyclical volume approach? Should you do a static set volume approach? And I wanted to illustrate here, it's the same principles, just being applied a little bit differently. But what matters the most is your technique in place? Are you actually applying an appropriate level of relative effort? And then dose volume accordingly as you need, because if you need more of a stimulus to disrupt homeostasis, like the reason why you have to do more sets as an advanced lifter versus a beginner lifter is because you're more used to the stimulus. You're not like, it's not as novel of a stimulus. Your body, we are adaptive beings. So if you do more of the same stimulus over and over again, it's reasonable to conclude, and we have data to support this as well, you're going to need more of a stimulus in order to have, you know, a training effect to elicit further training adaptations. So don't just assign volume arbitrarily, because more is not always better. And if you can progress well from less sets, do that. Like, that's great. Don't rush into doing more volume. There's no badge for doing more. Is if what you're working, if your training program is ultimately working well and it's allowing you to progress at your desired training rate, there's no need to add further good complexities or think the grass is always greener. Because sometimes if you're a beginner too, your recovery capacity is going to be limited. Like, it's not going to be as high as an advanced lifter because you haven't had that repeated exposure. And so sometimes if you're just chasing volume arbitrarily just because you think more is better, that's not always true. The grass is not always greener. Sometimes the grass dies. Like, if you don't water, if you're not taking care of it, if you're not actually paying attention to things, how it's responding, and like sometimes the grass will get drowned out. Like, the grass is not always greener. Focus on what's working. Create your training program around a logic and a scientific reasoning, and make adjustments accordingly only when you have to. Like, anyways, that's my rant. That's the video. Hopefully that made sense. That's how much training volume that you should do, just according to the phase. Yeah, if you guys are interested in coaching or programs, AdamPeelerFitness.com. Follow me on Instagram at AdamDPeeler. Subscribe, like my video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.